She lost her father, her mother, and her brother in one night. The world turned its back on her. The only people who offered her a hand were the ones hiding the darkest secret of all. Those empty eyes is more than a mystery. It's a story of betrayal at its deepest level, of shattered trust, and of one girl's journey to find herself after everything was taken away. I'm Clyde. Let me tell you this profound story on the Best Mystery Book Podcast.
Chapter 55. Washington, D.C., Tuesday, May 30th, 2023, 12:30 p.m. Annette Packard pulled through terminal traffic at Washington's Dulles Airport, spotted Lane Phillips, and pulled to the curb. Lane placed his small suitcase in the back seat and climbed into the passenger seat. "Thanks for the ride, Special Agent Packard." "Lane, good to see you," Annette said as she checked her side mirror and pulled back into traffic. "I didn't expect you to make a trip from Chicago just for my request." "I didn't. I'm giving a presentation tomorrow for the new recruits at the BSU. I figured we could hook up and have dinner while I'm in town. I found a few interesting angles with the Quinlan girls case. Were you able to reach her to see if she's available?" "I was. She was a little gun-shy. The press coverage about her case has died down over the years, but is not completely without life. She's still careful with her identity and who she allows in her inner circle." "How did you get in?" "I didn't, really. She's helping me and I'm helping her. That's the extent of our relationship. But yes, Alex agreed to meet you tonight. She didn't want to do it at a restaurant, so we're meeting at my place. Does that work?" "Sure thing," Lane said. "I'll get my research together at the hotel, take a quick shower, then I'll see you tonight. What time?" 8. Chapter 56. Washington, D.C., Tuesday, May 30th, 2023, 7:45 p.m. She found Annette Packard's building in the Columbia Heights neighborhood, worked hard to control her nerves, then climbed the steps to the building's front door. She took one last deep breath and pressed the doorbell. "You made it," Annette said when she opened the door. "Come on in." Alex followed her into the kitchen, where Annette had dinner in the oven, a rack of lamb that filled the house with a savory scent. "Can I get you a drink, beer or wine?" Annette asked. "I'll have a water, if you have one." Annette grabbed a bottle of Pellegrino from the fridge. "So, tell me who this guy is again," Alex said. "Dr. Lane Phillips. He was once, and is still today, considered the FBI's most famed profiler. His PhD dissertation was centered on understanding why killers kill, and proved his innate ability to climb into a killer's mind in ways no one else can. But how is a profiler going to help me with my family's murder? I'm not sure. I only knew that alone I could not, so I reached out to Lane. He's not only an accomplished criminal profiler, he's the creator of the Murder Accountability Project, a program used by countless police departments and homicide units across the country that helps solve cold case homicides. Basically, Lane and his company analyze random homicides to see if and how they are linked to one another. I showed him the photo of your evidence board, and he became quite interested. Then, with your permission, I sent him the details of the things you've discovered over the years." A week earlier, Alex had turned over the details of her decade-long journey into understanding the night her family was killed. She'd given Annette everything she'd ever learned about that night, in the hopes that a forensic psychologist named Lane Phillips could somehow make sense of it all. "After looking at all your work," Annette said, "Lane believes he's found a pattern. He wanted to talk, so here we are." Alex felt a sudden pulsing in her ribcage and tried to control her emotions. "He came from Chicago just to tell me about this pattern. He has business in D.C., so the timing worked out." The doorbell rang. "There he is," Annette said. Alex closed her eyes and took a deep breath as Annette headed for the front door. Her anxiety came not from the thought of listening to what Lane Phillips had to say, but from the idea that his insights might actually lead to answers. She'd searched so long for a resolution to her family's murder that looking became her identity. Answers were a mythical thing too far down the proverbial road she'd been traveling to worry about. Her personality had been built from the hunt, but here she was, potentially arriving at the faraway place where her work and research collided with answers. "Lane," Annette said. "This is Alex Armstrong." "Alex, this is Dr. Lane Phillips." Alex worked herself away from her fear and smiled. "Dr. Phillips, thanks for coming all the way from Chicago." The man was not what she expected. In her mind, Alex had conjured the image of an academic-looking older man with white hair and glasses, and a resigned personality cultivated from a lifelong exposure to the most ruthless killers society had known. But instead, Lane Phillips was a vibrant-looking 50-something-year-old man with a full head of bushy hair who could pass for someone much younger. He wore jeans and a light gray sports jacket over a button-down shirt, and smiled pleasantly when he looked at her. Affected not at all, it appeared, by his lifelong obsession with killers. "Call me Lane, please. Only my students use such formalities." "Dinner will be ready in about 30 minutes, Annette said. "Let's sit at the kitchen table to talk. Lane, something to drink?" "Sure. You have beer?" "I have a variety." "Something light. The hazy stuff gets to my stomach." A minute later, they all sat around the dining table. In front of Lane was a leather-bound folder. He opened it and removed 3 packets. "I'll just jump right in if that's all right," he said. Alex nodded. "And excuse me ahead of time. I understand how emotional and traumatic discussing the details about your family's case can be, even this many years later. So I apologize in advance for my directness. It's an affliction that I move from cordial conversation directly into clinical diagnosis mode." "Understood," Alex said. "Did you find anything?" "I think so. There are always gaps in these hypotheses, so I can't be sure. But the more eyes that look at my findings, the more likely it is someone will see what I cannot." Lane handed both Alex and Annette a packet, each several pages thick and held by a paper clip. "I took the work and research from your board, plus everything you provided to Annette, and extrapolated from there. Very good work, by the way. You have an eye for detail." Alex nodded. "Thanks. Here's what I know. Your family was killed on January 15th of 2013. Your diligent research proved that there were no connections to similar killings that involved other families. Specifically not in the vicinity of the East Coast of the United States. But in order to shed light on your family's killer, we have to figure out if that unknown killer has killed before or after. Of course, it's my confirmation bias to assume we're dealing with a serial killer. Now, if your family's case was a random act of violence, or the work of a one-and-done killer, then the likelihood that I'll be able to help you is not good. My expertise is in identifying similarities between random homicides and determining if there is a link that ties them together. When I sat down with your information, my goal was to determine if your family's murder was part of a series of murders committed by the same person." "And did you?" Alex asked. "Maybe." Lane pointed at the packet. "It's all in there, so let's go through it. Chasing a few of the leads you were able to come across. Specifically that your parents were associated with a man named Roland Glazer was the key. I followed that lead for a long time," Alex said, "but gave up on the Glazer angle. I could never make sense of it." "That's because alone, it makes very little sense," Lane said. "Together with many other factors, it brings a complicated puzzle together, or at least leads us to more pieces." Lane held up his copy of the packet, turned a page, and began to read. Roland Glazer hanged himself in jail the night before his trial, but he was, as your diligent work showed, tied to your parents' accounting firm. This is where my algorithm took an interesting turn. And remember, The AI attached to my computer program is not perfect. It picks up links that we might otherwise miss. Oftentimes, those links don't necessarily lead anywhere. But in this case, what the algorithm picked up was a connection to your law firm. Alex looked up from the packet. My law firm? Yes, your parents had a connection to Lancaster and Jordan after charges of sexual assault and sex trafficking were levied against Roland Glazer, shocking the celebrities, businessman and royalty who associated with him. Many of his associates looked for legal representation. Your parents, as accountants who handled some of Glazer's finances, did the same. My parents, Alex said, were clients of Lancaster and Jordan? Yes. My research showed that in 2012, Dennis and Helen Quinlan entered into a contract for legal representation with Lancaster and Jordan and paid a retainer fee of $15,000. From what I could tell, the relationship amounted to simple legal advice, as no charges were ever filed against your parents. No formal legal representation was required, a common occurrence, as I'm sure you're aware. What's interesting, though, is that Mr. Glazer, too, had entered into a legal agreement with your firm. My algorithm picked it up as a hit, which means only that the AI software found a way to connect your parents and Glazer. Other than that, Glazer was a client of your parents' accounting firm. The commonality being that they both were associated with Lancaster and Jordan, if just briefly. Alex returned her gaze to the page, reading and rereading the connection Dr. Phillips had uncovered between her parents and Glazer, struggling to understand what it meant. Again, this connection to Lancaster and Jordan may mean nothing, Lane said. My algorithm simply identifies links between homicides. My analysts take over from there to see if those links lead anywhere further. Because Annette just asked me recently to look into this case, my analysts haven't had the time to complete their research. But here is what we've found so far. Lane turned a page in the packet. Since 2013, I was able to identify 4 clients of Lancaster and Jordan who were victims of homicide, all on the East Coast. Alex felt the room spin as a wave of lightheadedness came over her. She looked up briefly, but neither Lane nor Annette noticed her struggle. Lane was reading from his packet, and Annette was following along, hooked on every word. Alex took a deep breath and tuned back in to Lane's findings. In 2016, a man named Carl Clement died by gunshot, wound after a home invasion. Police never had any leads, and the case is still unsolved today. In January of that year, Clement was a college counselor at a local high school and was charged with sexually assaulting one of his students. He sought legal counsel from Lancaster and Jordan. In 2017, a man named Robert Klein was arrested for aggravated assault and molestation of his neighbor's 12-year-old daughter. He, too, sought legal representation from Lancaster and Jordan. He was killed in his home 6 months later. Lane looked up from his packet. Any guesses how Klein was killed? Gunshot wound, Annette said, during a suspected home invasion. Bingo. Police chalked it up to a burglary gone bad. Lane turned the page. Okay, stick with me. 2 more. In 2019, a guy named Nathan Coleman was arrested for soliciting sex from a minor. He sought representation by Lancaster and Jordan, but charges were dropped due to a technicality. 2 months later, he was found dead in his living room. Official line: shot and killed during a home invasion. Lane turned the page of his packet. Finally, we have a guy named Byron Zell. The sound of Byron Zell's name caused Alex's stomach to sink and her forehead to bead with sweat. Wait a minute, Annette said. I've heard that name. So has Alex, Lane said. Byron Zell was on her evidence board. Alex's vision blurred as she thought back to her meeting with Hank. Donovan, the detective who had given her the details about Zell's crime scene. Pictures of Zell's victims had been left around his body. Alex had drawn a faint connection to her parents' crime scene, but had run out of real estate from there. But now, the FBI's most renowned criminal profiler, had also connected the murder of her parents to Byron Zell. But through a different link, they were all clients of Lancaster and Jordan. Lane looked at Annette. The name probably rings a bell because the homicide happened right here in DC, about a month ago. It took a sophisticated computer algorithm constantly updated with new artificial intelligence technology for me to arrive where Alex got all on her own. Sexual assault, Alex managed to say. What's that? Annette asked. All the cases have to do with sexual assault. Exactly, Lane said. Sexual assault against minors, more specifically. The dizziness consumed her for a moment, and Alex rocked in her chair before gripping the table to right herself. You okay? Annette asked. Alex regained her bearings, swallowed hard, and then looked at Annette. They had photos around them. They had what? Annette asked. Alex's mouth was cotton dry and she gulped from her water bottle before continuing. My parents. Whoever killed them dropped photos of Roland Glazer's victims near their bodies. 3 young women who worked for Glazer. They disappeared shortly after Glazer was indicted on sex trafficking charges. Many believe Glazer killed them to keep them quiet about what was going on at his private island. Whoever killed Byron Zell did the same thing. Deposited photos of his victims around his body. Annette slowly turned her head to look at Lane. Any idea if these other victims you've identified had photos left by their bodies? Lane nodded. All of them. He held up the packet. So what we have is a cluster of victims who are all tied in some way to the sexual assault of minors. All were clients of Lancaster and Jordan, and all were killed by gunshot, and with the same calling card attached. Photos of their victims left behind. Lane turned a page in his packet. This brings us to the point in the conversation where we transition from computer algorithm to human analytics. Or my specialty, criminal profiling. I've created a detailed profile of what this killer may look like. Alex and Annette quickly turned the pages of their packets to follow along. The algorithm found a common connection to 4 homicides. But remember, that was a search starting after your family was killed in 2013. So we have 5 homicide cases starting in 2013 if we include your family. That's either a bizarre coincidence, Annette said, or it's very dangerous to seek legal advice from Lancaster and Jordan. Alex stayed quiet. Her mind was racing too quickly to organize her thoughts into coherent questions. There is no coincidence, Lane said. Only the illusion of coincidence. And to get to the bottom of that illusion, I constructed a profile of the type of person who might be behind a string of homicides like the ones the algorithm picked up on. Lane paused to take a sip of beer. Let's start with age and gender. Considering that we're talking about someone who committed the Quinlan family murders in 2013, the killer would be well into his 30s. But considering the sophistication of the crimes, I suspect the killer is older, mid-40s to mid-50s. Sophistication, Annette asked. Although the homicides occurred at the victims' homes. In order for that to be possible, the killer had to gain access to the home, kill the victim, and flee. That takes cunning, patience, and planning. This is not some kid running around shooting people. Lane went back to his packet. So we've got someone who's 45 to 55, cunning and intelligent, and likely holds a job of some importance. White collar much more likely than blue collar. And most importantly, this person has a vendetta against those who commit crimes of sexual predation against minors. But it's not just a vendetta, it's a personal vendetta. In all likelihood, the killer was sexually assaulted as a child. And he's now taking revenge for his own sexual abuse on predators today, Annette said. Correct. So we've got a middle-aged guy who was abused as a kid who is now finding sexual predators and killing them, Annette said. Those predators have bottlenecked his clients at Lancaster and Jordan. She looked briefly at Alex before turning back to Lane. "You think it's someone at Lancaster and Jordan? Is that the idea?" "Maybe," Lane said. "But so far we've only concentrated on homicide since 2013. To paint a complete picture of this killer, I looked at the years before Alex's family was killed and came across an interesting incident that occurred in 1981 at a summer camp in the Appalachian Mountains." "A summer camp?" Alex asked. "Yes, Camp Montague. What I found indicates that this killer has been at it for much longer than 10 years. Part Vix. The profile of a killer. An object at rest. Alex Armstrong. Camp Montague, Appalachian Mountains. They hid in the darkness of the clearing behind Jerry Lawlins' cabin. Cicadas buzzed in rhythmic tones and blended into the night. Neither talked while they huddled close to the trunk of the large oak and tried to ignore the mosquitoes. 11 o'clock approached and Camp Montague finally settled for the night as the cabins, one by one, went dark. Mr. Lawlins' cabin stayed brightly lighted, however, and soon his screen doors squeaked open. They watched from the darkness as he stood on the front porch and surveyed the camp. Surely, they thought, deciding if it was safe to embark on his stalking. Would it be her cabin he went to tonight? She hoped so. But she knew there were others he preyed on. She knew this because Jerry had used a Polaroid camera to take photos of her while she was in various stages of undress. The click-shin sound the camera made when he pointed it at her and snapped the photos, as well as the sound of the film ejecting from the camera, sickened her when she thought of it. "Ah, good girl," Jerry had said the first time he'd photographed her. "Look how pretty you are." She'd barely been able to look at that first photo he showed her. She'd seen herself naked in the bathroom mirror. But that image existed only in her own mind, and it disappeared once she left the bathroom. The photo Mr. Lawland held had made her feel embarrassed and ashamed, knowing that it would never vanish like her reflection. When Mr. Lawland opened his dresser drawer to deposit the photograph inside, she'd seen the photos of his other victims. There were too many to count during her quick glance into the drawer. Maybe 10, maybe 15. The kids in the photos were also naked, like her. She remembered them now as she hid in the woods, and knew that tonight was not just retribution for what Mr. Lawland had done to her. It was reprisal for all his victims, past, present, and future. They watched him walk from the front porch. He headed toward the middle of camp, to where her cabin stood. He would be surprised to find her bed empty, and they were counting on his anger to distract him when he came back. They hurried from the clearing and ran to the side of the cabin. Every counselor's cabin was fitted with a natural gas source to fuel the barbecue grills that stood outside the screened porches. They scurried to the grill and crouched down. "Watch him," he said as he took the tools from his pocket. She moved to the edge of the cabin and peered off into the distance, squinting her eyes as she watched Mr. Lawland disappear into the darkness of Camp Montague. They figured they had 5 minutes, but that was if he simply turned around and came back once he found her cabin empty. They were counting on Mr. Lawland taking an extra few minutes to look for her, checking the outhouse, and then the main lot. She returned to the grill and took her spot next to him. "He's gone," she said. She watched him reach behind the barbecue grill until he found the gas line that ran from the cabin. He used the pliers they'd taken from the utility closet to twist the bolt that secured the gas line to the grill. It took a few seconds of forced effort until the bolt broke free, and then it turned easily. He spun the fitting until the line fell free from the grill, then stood and pulled the slack out of the line until it was stretched to its full length. It was just long enough to reach the window. "It's locked," she said when she tried to open the window that led to Mr. Lawland's bedroom. "I'll go in and unlock it." "What if he comes back?" "It won't take me long," she said, taking a hard swallow before speaking again. "I've been in there before." In a mad dash, she skirted past him and cut around the corner, then scrambled up the front steps of the cabin. Stairs she climbed for the first time weeks ago with Mr. Lawland's firm grip on the back of her neck. The screen door squeaked now as she opened it and slid inside. She ran to the lone bedroom and tried. to ignore the images and memories that littered her mind when she stepped foot inside the room. Jerry Lolland with his shirt off, exposing his bloated, hairy belly. The way his callous hands felt when he touched her. The sound of the Polaroid camera spitting out photos of her. She crossed the room quickly and twisted open the window lock. It had taken less than 30 seconds. She was back outside and around the corner of the cabin before they saw Mr. Lolland in the distance, walking back to his cabin. "Hurry," she said, placing her hand to the glass and pushing upward until the window was cracked open. He handed her the gas line, and she snuck it over the sill and into the cabin before closing the window again, just as they heard Mr. Lolland climb the steps of the front porch. It was too dangerous to run back to the clearing, so they instead crouched below the window and tried to make themselves as small as possible. The bedroom light clicked on, and the glow fell onto the ground in front of them and spilled into the forest. They waited, barely breathing, for 30 minutes until the bedroom light went out. They waited 30 more before they contemplated moving, and 30 more after that, until they were certain he was asleep. He nodded at her, and she reached to the red valve at the base of the cabin's outer wall. She twisted the lever until it was parallel with the line, allowing gas to flow into Jerry Lolland's cabin. They waited another moment, and then crept away from the cabin and headed back into camp. She was too scared to sleep in her cabin for fear that Jerry would somehow escape their trap and come for her. Plus, she still had work to do, and for this last part of the plan, she needed no accomplice. While the rest of the camp slept, she settled into one of the chairs that encircled the fire pit. Orange embers glowed from the night's fire, and she forced herself to stare at the smoldering coals to stay awake. The hours passed, but did so slowly, as if each minute were a perversion of time, made up of some value. Greater than 60 seconds, when finally a hazy and far-off glow came to the horizon, she crept back into the forest and made her way to the clearing. Mr. Lolland's cabin was quiet and calm and dark. Slowly, she emerged from the forest and approached the back of the cabin, then crouched below the window before lifting herself to peer over the windowsill. It was dark inside but for the glow of the alarm clock on the night table, which offered just enough light to see Mr. Lolland lying in bed. He was lifeless and still, but to simply kill Jerry Lolland was not good enough. The world needed to know his sins and judge him accordingly. She hurried around to the front of the cabin and silently climbed the 3 steps of the front porch. The screen door screeched, putting the fear of death in her, that if Mr. Lolland was still alive, he'd be waiting for her. After a moment of silence, though, she knew he was dead. She slipped inside the cabin and tiptoed down the hallway. The odor of gas was strong and permeated from the bedroom. When she pushed open the bedroom door, she saw him lying on his back with one arm hanging over the edge of the mattress. The sheets covered him from the waist down, and the early glow of dawn spilled through the window to illuminate his hairy stomach, causing her own to roil with nausea. Still, she forced herself to stare at the man's torso, which she did for a full minute to make sure he wasn't breathing. When she was certain, she went to his dresser and opened the top drawer. There, she found the photos of herself and his other victims, their faces blurred together, and she could hardly bring herself to look at the photos as she grabbed them from the drawer, feeling as ashamed for Jerry's other victims as she did for herself. But one face in the photos stood out from the others. She lifted the photo close to her eyes, urging the breaking dawn to prove her wrong. But there was no mistaking her brother. He was younger in the photo, and she realized it was probably taken when he, too, was a first-year recruit at Camp Montague. He'd never told her. She took the photo of her brother and slipped it in her pocket. His secret would stay safe with her, the same way she would never discuss with another soul what Jerry Lolland had done to her. She would never force her brother to do so either. She would protect his secret as long as he wanted to keep it. But Jerry's other victims would not stay anonymous. There was no other way. She walked to the bed, stood over Jerry Lolland's lifeless body, and placed the photos, one by one, across his chest and around his face. The man deserved to die, but she would not allow death to hide his sins. When she finished, she stared at the man who had abused her. A feeling of satisfaction came over her. It filled her with a sense of peace and worth, knowing the anguish she had endured at the hands of this predator now held purpose. She needed to go through the pain of this man's abuse because she was meant to stop Jerry Lawland from hurting others. Her pain was fuel she used to punish him for what he did to her, to the others in the photos, and to her brother. Jerry Lawland would start her on a lifelong quest to root out those who abused others, and deliver justice to them that a moral society could not. 2 hours later, just after 7:00 a.m., she was asleep in bed when she heard them. The sound dragged not just her, but all the residents from bed. Along with other confused kids, she wandered out of her cabin and congregated by the campfire area. As Camp Montague came to life in the most unusual of ways that morning. Not through whistles from the counselors or Mr. McGuire's voice over the loudspeaker, as they were accustomed to waking each morning, but instead by an ambulance siren. Chapter 57. Washington, D.C., Tuesday, May 30th, 2023, 9:32 p.m. Camp Montague was a summer camp for 13 to 18-year-olds, Lane said. It shut down in 1981 after one of the counselors killed himself. And the place has something to do with my family being killed, Alex asked. Maybe. What happened at Camp Montague adds to the profile I've built of this killer, and allows me to connect the past to the present. Alex glanced quickly at Annette, then looked back down at the packet as Lane continued. A counselor at Camp Montague named Jerry Lawland died in the middle of the summer in 1981. They found him in his cabin. The autopsy report I managed to get my hands on lists the cause of death as asphyxiation due to carbon monoxide poisoning. He killed himself? Annette said. That's the official line. How does the suicide of a camp counselor in 1981 have anything to do with my family? Alex asked. Well, that's the kicker. This happened 40+ years ago, so I had trouble tracking down anyone who was directly involved in the case. After I found the connection, I mostly relied on public records, but I was able to tap my sources and get hold of one of the detectives who handled the case, a guy named Martin Crew. He's in his late 70s now and has been retired for years. Still, he remembered the case like it was yesterday. What was so memorable? Alex asked. The fact that Jerry Lawland was a pedophile. Annette squinted her eyes. How could a pedophile get a job as a camp counselor? No one knew the guy was a predator until they found him dead in his cabin, and only then because they found pictures of his victim spread out around his body. The packet fell from Alex's hands. I know, Lane said. It's shocking. If my profile is correct, whoever killed your family also killed Jerry Lawland. And that means the killer was one of Jerry Lawland's victims. Do you have the names? Alex asked. Of Lawland's victims? No. They were sealed and not made public back then. I haven't had the time to dig deep enough to find them on my own. Alex stood up. Her hands were trembling when she ran them through her hair. Do you have contact information for the detective you spoke with? Lane turned to the last page in his packet and held it up for Alex to see. He pointed to the name and phone number of the detective who ran the Jerry Lawland investigation. I figured you'd ask for it. Chapter 58. Washington, D.C., Tuesday, May 30th, 2023, 9:45 p.m. She left Annette's house in Columbia Heights and drove straight to Lancaster and Jordan. The parking lot was empty that late at night. Even the diehards who lived in the den had given up by 9 p.m. Her phone was pressed to her ear as she rode the elevator to the 9th floor, hurried through the den, and entered her office, clicking on the lights as she went. Hold on, Alex said into the phone. I'm not there yet. On her way to the office, she had called Kyle Lindbergh, an old Allegheny friend whose savant-like computer skills had likely saved him from a life of violent crimes. He landed in Allegheny for armed robbery, At age 16, he held up a 7-Eleven. Inside Allegheny, Alex had told him how very stupid it was to use a gun to get what he wanted. She was particularly touchy about that subject, and her words had resonated with Kyle Lindbergh. After his release, he never picked up a gun again. Instead, he honed his computer skills and put them to good use. These days, he made a living by farming his savant-like talents out to those who needed high-tech computer hacking. Alex was happy to have him on speed dial. She told him what she needed him to do: scale the firewall that protected confidential and archived files at Lancaster and Jordan. The firm's attorney-client privilege agreement called for inactive or retired files to be archived and sealed. Those files were accessible only by the attorney who handled the case. Active cases were not as protected. Many employees, including Alex, could use their password to gain access to those files. But the case was concluded. The files were stashed in a digital vault, accessible only by the attorney who worked the case. At her desk, she set Lane Phillips' packet next to her keyboard and shook the mouse to bring her monitor to life. "Okay," Alex said, putting her phone on speaker. "I'm at my computer." "Enter your password," Kyle said, "to get me into Lancaster and Jordan's motherboard. I'll do the rest from there." Alex typed her password and clicked enter. "I'm in." "Okay," Kyle said. "I'm taking control of your computer." Alex heard a violent flurry of keystrokes as Kyle went to work. Her computer screen turned black, and a series of nonsensical code appeared in white font. For 10 minutes, the screen continued to fill and refill with gibberish until the monitor went completely dark for an instant before blinking back to life. "In," Kyle said. "Your guy almost knows what he's doing. I had to back-end gerrymander a couple of firewalls, and I left a few digital footprints in the process. If a good geek looks, they'll see that we hacked it. I still have time to turn around and erase everything, but only if we decide not to go any farther." "Not gonna happen," Alex said. "I can get into the files now?" "Yeah, use Morse code for whenever a file is password protected, and you should be granted access. That password disappears in 12 hours and will then be useless. Until then, you've got free reign of any file you're interested in." "Thanks, Kyle. I'll call you back if I run into any dead ends." "You won't. Want to tell me why you're hacking into your own computer system?" "Not really." "Bill's in the mail," he said. "It took you all of 10 minutes. Gotta eat, girl," he said before the line went dead. Alex concentrated on her computer and started pulling up archived files that held 2 decades worth of Lancaster and Jordan clients. She scrolled through until she found the year 2012. Listed alphabetically were all the clients Lancaster and Jordan represented that year. Alex scrolled to the queues and found her parents' names: Dennis and Helen. Quinlan. Tears pooled on her lower lids as she stared at her parents' names and tried to make sense of it all. She entered the temporary password and checked her parents' file. She wiped her eyes and grabbed Dr. Phillips' research packet. She took 15 more minutes to confirm that every name of every victim in the packet was also listed in the Lancaster and Jordan archives: Carl Klama, Robert Klein, and Nathan Coleman. She didn't need to confirm Byron Zell. She printed a single page from each file, the client profile page, and laid them on her desk. She needed to see them all together in one space rather than toggling back and forth through the files. Printed at the bottom of each page was the name of the Lancaster and Jordan attorney who handled the case: Jacqueline Jordan. Alex shook her head, trying to determine if what she was thinking was possible. She scooped up the files and placed them to the side of her desk before going back to her computer. She closed out of the Lancaster and Jordan database and pulled up the internet. She typed Camp Montague into the search engine and then narrowed her hunt by adding the camp counselor's name. When she typed Camp Montague and Jerry Lawland into the search engine, she found several news articles chronicling the suicide death and the scandal that ensued. "Alex," someone said, startling her. When she looked up, Jacqueline Jordan was standing in the doorway of her office. Chapter 59. Washington, D.C., Tuesday, May 30th, 2023. 11:05 p.m. Jacqueline Jordan pulled into the parking lot of Lancaster and Jordan saw a lone car parked there. It was normal to see sporadic vehicles sitting in the dark, but even the hardest working scrubs packed things up by 10:00 p.m. Jacqueline rode the elevator to the 10th floor and looked around the office. Other than the emergency lights that glowed 24 hours a day, the place was dark and quiet. She took a stroll through the hallways, eventually passing Garrett's corner office and then making her way to her own. She spent a few minutes writing up what she'd learned from her jailhouse visit to Reese Rankin. The police were mostly satisfied that they had their man, but Matthew Claymore's backpack was still an explosive piece of evidence that might require defusing in the future, especially if Rankin's argument that he was a hired thug came to light, gained traction, but it was unlikely anyone serious would listen to Rankin's story. Still, she needed to be prepared in case it became something from which she needed to protect Matthew. Jacqueline finished her brief and shut off the office light. In the elevator, she pressed the button for the 9th floor instead of the lobby, then walked out into the den, as it was called by the associates, paralegals, and investigators who spent their time there. One office glowed with light and stood out against the otherwise dark space. She headed toward it. "Alex," she said. "What are you doing here so late?" Jacqueline noted Alex's fear, a look in her eyes like the girl were staring at a demon. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." "No, you didn't," Alex said, standing quickly and gathering the papers that were strewn around her desk. I didn't know anyone was here." "Are you sure you're okay?" Yeah. I was just trying to get some work done. I'm finished now." Jacqueline watched Alex fumble with the papers until she gathered them all in a haphazard bundle. "What are you doing here so late?" Alex asked. Jacqueline narrowed her eyes as she watched Alex's frantic behavior. "I was working on the Matthew Claymore case," Jacqueline said. "Really? I thought that was finished." "It is, mostly. I'm just tying up some loose ends." "Anything interesting, or something you need my help on?" "No," she said. "Matthew's in the clear now. Just making sure nothing can come back and hurt him if Reese Rankin decides to recant his confession." Alex nodded. "Well, let me know if you need anything." Jacqueline moved to the side when Alex skirted past her and into the hallway. She sensed Alex willing her to follow. When Jacqueline didn't, Alex forced the issue by reaching past her to close the office door. "I was just on my way out," Alex said. "Are you coming or going?" "Going, probably, at this time of night." Jacqueline took a moment before she answered, highlighting Alex's rapid speech and nervous demeanor. "Going," Jacqueline finally said. "I'll head down with you." A few minutes later, they both walked out the front doors of Lancaster and Jordan and onto their respective vehicles. Jacqueline started her car and looked in the rearview mirror. Alex's headlights came on, and Jacqueline watched her drive out of the parking lot. Jacqueline waited a minute and then turned her engine off and exited her car. She was through the lobby and in the elevator a minute later. When the doors opened on the 9th floor, Jacqueline stepped into the den and headed straight for Alex's office. She clicked on the lights and stepped behind Alex's desk. The surface had been cluttered with papers when Jacqueline had surprised her a few minutes earlier, but now the desk was empty. She sat down and shook the mouse. Alex's monitor blinked on, and Jacqueline began to analyze the screen. It took just a moment to recognize that she was looking at the archived records of Lancaster and Jordan, an alphabetical list of clients arranged according to year. Jacqueline clicked on the menu at the top of the screen to see the last few searches that had been made, each name appearing in a drop-down menu. Nathan Coleman, 2019. Robert Klein, 2017. Carl Clement, 2016. Dennis and Helen Quinlan, 2012. Jacqueline breathed calmly as she stared at the names. She thought back to Alex's jittery behavior a few moments earlier. Finally, she dragged the mouse to the corner of the screen and closed the window that held Lancaster and Jordan's archived files. When she did, she was met by an image that took her back to her past, like a portal through time. The image of Camp Montague transported her across the years and turned her briefly into the 13-year-old girl she was during her first and only summer at Camp Montague. On Alex's computer screen was a Washington Post article about a camp counselor named Jerry Lawland, who had killed himself in the summer of 1981. It took 10 long years, but now Jacqueline knew that her visit to the Quinlan home in McIntosh, Virginia, had finally caught up with her. Chapter 60. Wytheville, Virginia, Wednesday, May 31st, 2023, 7:32 p.m. The GPS estimated the drive to Wytheville, Virginia, would take 5 hours. Alex took her time, drove in the middle lane, and allowed her mind to roam. She'd snuck out of the office early and was on the highway and the open road by 2:30 p.m. She should have been frantic. She should have driven like a lunatic. She should have been desperate to get to Wytheville, Virginia, where the detective who worked the Jerry Lawland case lived. Detective Martin Crew had agreed to meet Alex and discuss everything he remembered about the Camp Montague case from 1981. With potential answers waiting, Alex should have been filled with urgency and anxiousness. Instead, she drove the limit and allowed other cars to zip around her. 10 years of torment and searching was coming to an end. Alex had dreamt of this moment. During her sleeping hours, she had often imagined a similar scene where the mystery of her family's death was on the other side of the proverbial door she'd encountered during her dreams. All she needed to do was open that door for the answers to spill forth. But during those dreams, something had always stopped her. The door had no handle, or was bolted with the only lock she'd ever found that she could not pick. But now, here she was, driving to meet a detective who might hold the key to that door. She should be speeding. She should be restless. Instead, Alex was filled with sorrow for what she feared she might find. Wytheville was situated in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, had a population of 8,000, and a hotel resume to match. Alex pulled into town at just past 7:30 p.m. Detective Crew had agreed to meet on short notice, but could not do so until 8 o'clock. Alex knew she wouldn't be able to make the hours. Long drive back to D.C. after her meeting, so she found a motel on the edge of town, paid for a single night, and pulled her car to the front of room 109. She exited the car, then keyed the door and entered. Small but clean, the room offered a full bed, nightstand and dresser with a television. She set her overnight bag on the bed, brushed her teeth, and applied a dark shade of lipstick to match her mood. She locked the door on the way out and drove into town. The Sly Fox, whose name was displayed in red neon, along with glowing Budweiser and Pabst Blue Ribbon signs, was located on a corner in the middle of the main drag. Inside, Alex saw an older man sitting at the bar and, since the establishment was otherwise empty, deduced that he must be Martin Crew. Country music played from unseen speakers, and a television behind the bar showed a baseball game. She walked up to the man. "Detective Crew." "Alex Armstrong?" the man asked, offering a sideways glance at Alex's piercings and tattoos. Alex nodded. "Yeah, thanks for meeting on such short notice. When I heard you were willing to drive all the way from D.C. to talk, I knew it was something urgent." The drive wasn't bad, about 5 hours. It's not the length of the drive that's got me curious. It's the fact that you're the second person in 2 weeks who's tracked me down about a pedophile camp counselor who killed himself 40+ years ago. It was a prickly case back then, and I was never satisfied with its conclusion. The fact that it's somehow resurrecting itself this many years later has my attention. I'm as curious to know why you're interested in this case as you are to hear what I have to say. Let's talk. Alex took the stool next to the detective. What are you drinking? Detective Crew asked. Soda and lime. The detective waved down the bartender. So, Crew said, is your inquiry related to Dr. Lane Phillips contacting me a week or so back? It is, Alex said. Well, technically, his inquiry was related to mine. Either way, I'm hoping you might be able to provide the answers I'm looking for. Fire away. I hope to get some myself. I'm a legal investigator for a big firm up in DC. There have been some interesting developments with a few of the firm's clients, brought to my attention by Dr. Phillips. What sort of developments, how interesting, and what's it got to do with Jerry Lolland? Maybe nothing, but that's what I'm here to figure out. A few of the firm's clients have died under suspicious circumstances, and Dr. Phillips managed to link the deaths, possibly, back to Jerry Lolland's suicide. Can you tell me what you remember about the case? Now I'm more curious than ever. The Lolland case was a while ago, but after I got a call from Dr. Phillips, I headed back into the Wythe County Sheriff's Office. I worked there for 20 years, before I did detective work for the state, so I still had some people I could reach out to. You were a detective for the state of Virginia. Yes, that's how I got involved with the Jerry Lolland case. Was it typical to call in state investigators for a suicide? No, not at all. We got called in because of the kiddie porn that was found around Lolland's body. Right. Can you tell me about that? Camp Montague was a prestigious summer camp in the area, just about 10 miles from Wytheville. People sent their kids there from all over the state, and even farther. It was an 8-week summer camp that taught teenagers independence and helped them make the transition into college. You know, typical camp mantra. At least, that's how the place was built. Montague shut down after Jerry Lolland's suicide and the scandal that followed. Lolland was one of the longtime counselors. He basically ran the place and was in charge of recruitment too. If a parent was interested in sending their kid to Montague, they met with Jerry Lolland to hear the camp's pitch, all that Montague had to offer, and how safe their route. Children would be. It was chilling to learn that this man preyed on the very children he recruited. Tell me how you found out about Jerry Lolland and his abuse against children. It was the summer of 1981. I got a call to investigate a death out at Camp Montague. It was a suspected suicide, but with a twist. A bunch of photos had been found around the body. Photos of naked children, all identified as kids enrolled at Camp Montague. The kids were first-year recruits, all of them between 13 and 14 years old. The photos were taken on an old Polaroid camera, state-of-the-art back then, the kind that spits out a photo as soon as you take it. Pretty disturbing stuff. I spoke to the kids identified in the photos, and they all told similar stories. Jerry Lolland came to their cabin late at night and lured them back to his own cabin. Lured them how? Told them he needed to speak with them privately about something urgent, and that they'd get in trouble if they didn't go with him. Remember, these kids were young and impressionable, and were likely scared and homesick the first time they went away to summer camp. Truly vile, Alex said. Yes, a predator in the true sense of the word. At any rate, Lolland got the kids back to his cabin and sexually abused them. Part of his routine was to take photos of them. The photos might be the link to the case I'm working. They were found around Lolland's body, as in he was looking at the photos when he killed himself. Detective Crew took a sip of his drink. The working theory at the time was this. Lolland succumbed to his guilt and shame, piped the barbecue gas line into his room, sealed up the windows and laid in his bed to die, pulled out all the photos of his victims over the years, and laid them out as his confession of sorts. But now you believe something else happened? I've always believed something else happened. I just couldn't prove it. Could never even pursue it due to the sensitive nature of the case. You don't think Lolland killed himself? No, I don't. But the problem with detective work is that what you think and what you can prove are different things. Crew lifted his drink. It's the reason so many detectives are raging alcoholics. Alex smiled. I thought that was a cliché saved for bad television. Maybe it is. I guess I can only speak for myself. Detective Crew finished his drink and flagged down the bartender. If Jerry Lawland didn't gas himself, then how did he die? Oh, the gas killed him. That's not up for debate. I saw the gas line with my own 2 eyes. He died from asphyxiation due to carbon monoxide poisoning. But it's not the cause of death that I'm questioning. It's the manner. Suicide was listed on the autopsy as the formal manner of death. I've always believed it was homicide. The detective's drink arrived, and he took a sip. The problem was that I could never prove who killed him, even though I was damn sure I knew who it was. Alex swallowed hard. She remembered Lane Phillips' guess from the day before. If my profile is correct, whoever killed your family also killed Jerry Lawland. And that means the killer was one of Jerry Lawland's victims.